Ayo, what you cooking?
Welcome to Lend Me a Fiver podcast, where we have conversations with people who have had successful journeys. Make sure you subscribe and share and like the video. We get a lot of views, but people need to like the video if you enjoy it, so we understand, we know how you feel about it. Also, leave comments, communicate with us. We'll get back to you, we'll respond. We try to respond to all the comments. Let us know who you want to see, let us know what you liked about the video, what you didn't like, and we'll get back to you. Today I want to welcome Kazy. Many of you may have seen his page, Property by Kazy. He's a special guest. He's a property developer. I think you've built somewhat of a social media following.
Small.
Yeah, with your home transformations and flipping homes. And my understanding is that you aim to have a £10 million portfolio in the next 3 years.
It's funny. I think with that's a funny thing because, like, you know, when you're starting something, like someone says, "Oh, write a bio." You make an Instagram, you got to start a bio. Yeah. Like, so I was like looking at other people's bios, and everyone had something there. I was like, I've got to put. It's
a good target, though.
But to be fair, it's like I might even change that today, because at this point in time, I'm not super concerned about what my portfolio's worth.
Okay.
Because I'm actively trying to grow like my working capital pot. I'm kind of speak later about what that means and how you do that as opposed to growing an active portfolio. But like, my portfolio could be 5 million today and 3 million tomorrow because I've disposed of loads of assets. I want to start some really big projects. Yeah. But I think it's a good goal to have. Yeah. But I think if anything, that would be like my last like numerical goal of target, like for now anyway, until I'm like, do you know what, I've spent enough time kind of growing and now I want a bit more passive income from a large portfolio.
So I guess we may even have a bit of a lesson in the intro, in that you're saying that the actual numerical targets aren't that important when you're building.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's stuff that you need to understand what you want from any industry. Like, if you want to get into construction as a construction manager, if you have a salary expectation, you need to understand, okay, look, what's the ceiling of what I can earn, for somebody else, what can I earn doing it myself, etc. And I think the same is the case for property. If you want to get into property, like, what are you doing it for? Are you doing it because you want a load of relatively passive income? Are you doing it because you're trying to grow some capital that you already have? Do you want some kind of combination of the two? But yes, if you're trying to get an element of income, that income comes off the back of your investments. So your investments will be worth a certain amount. Yeah. So a lot of people will say, okay, I want a portfolio worth 10 million, but off the back of that 10 million, I also want to be making £10,000, 20, 30, however much, like £1,000 a month. And then you kind of have to look at what do you want out of life at the moment. Like, are you looking for a big income? Do you need a big income to sort of, to manage your standard of living? Okay. Or are you still in maybe a place where you're trying to grow and grow something for the future?
Okay. All right. Nice. Okay. So we'll get into this in more detail. Yeah. So obviously you've got your own show as well called Ask Someone Else. Yeah. And I guess you have other people from the property industry and they give their perspective on. Yeah,
so I need to get I'm gonna get a nice setting like this at some point. You know what I mean? So I'm just over here getting tips. We got plants, we got merch, you know what I mean? We got all the visuals, the lighting's good. I'm feeling like I'm glowing. So I need something like this.
Nice. It's it makes it a bit of a home, you know what I'm saying? So
it's a hub. You feel comfortable.
You feel, exactly.
I'm sure, like you said, the viewers feel like they engage a bit more because they're used to the set.
Exactly.
So it makes sense. But yes, at the moment I just literally do it off Instagram Live every Sunday, 6 p.m. So if you're not already, follow that, Property by Kazy, and we're live every Sunday. Yeah. But to be honest, it was a thing of, like, I'd built a platform quite quickly. But I was like, look, I'm just one of loads of people in property that I feel are doing good stuff, but I know so many. So I wanted to get all these different people on, that one, it would shed light on what they're doing, but two, also everybody was always asking questions. It was literally an opportunity to ask somebody else. So ask an architect, ask an accountant, ask like a tax specialist, ask whoever, a planning consultant, whoever may be that we have on that week, something in property. And then it meant like my followers would learn from them. It would give exposure to other people doing good things. Yep. So we're on season 3 now. Okay. Just started. So we've sort of done 24 24, 25 episodes at this point. So, but I think, yeah, it's definitely something that I would like to actually have now. No COVID, like I set up in COVID as well. So post COVID, have in-person conversations, formalize it a bit more. Get this, you know what I mean? This crisp sound, not my sound just with my AirPods on.
No, I feel you, bro. No, it's good. It's good, bro. And so many people would have seen those posts and those and whether or not you've appeared on someone else's platform, because I've seen you on like the Made You Thinks and whatever. Just so they would have seen those. But so for people who haven't seen you yet, can we just we'll keep it brief, but just like a brief overview about how you got into the property industry, how you learnt the game, but also a bit about you, like where you're from, like you're a Londoner, like whereabouts, etc.
So yeah, I'm Kazim Ali Balogan, so like Nigerian / English heritage. Yeah, man, you know these boys are sharp.
Trust me.
But yeah, in terms of my background, I you know, sort of quite conventional in terms of went to university. Actually dropped out of university. I was at Brunel for a little while.
How many years did you go?
So I was at university I was there for a year, but I was probably there in spirit for like a month, and then just sort of did nothing for a year. But it just wasn't the right time. Okay. And I think like that's important with any vocation you're going to get into. You've got to do it for you. I think at that point it was very much like family etc. Just it's just what you do, or maybe not even so much family, because I think family is a really good driver to do stuff, because you care about your family, so you want to do well for them. But for me at that point in time, it was I didn't have direction. It was just like I don't know what to do. So everyone else is going to university, let me go. Like dropped out, and then went back like a year later. I went to South Bank, studied economics. But by that point in time, my sort of entrepreneurial spirit and you know had really kicked off. So my first business was a shisha business. Okay. We started with sort of shisha stalls in like nightclubs. Went on to doing like pop-up events at like festivals and stuff like that. Okay. I would say my favorite was V-Fest, like probably biggest one we did as well. So like,
what happened to that then, the shisha business?
So then after that, I had a bar / shisha bar that was round the corner from my university that I ran whilst I was at university. Okay. Great returns, great margins, but I think I kind of fell out of love with it a little bit. So when I first started shisha, I started the business because I just went on holiday and was like, oh, shisha, this is sick. Like, this is fun. Like, I'm actually enjoying this. Took it back. So it was in Egypt. Kind of took the vibe back to London. It was like, okay, we can do something with this over here. But I think partially just it's obviously a very kind of people-heavy business. Yep. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. It was late nights. I kind of felt like I didn't really have, you know, my time as much as I'd like to. But did make some good money from that. I think in hindsight, you know, if I would have had certain other things in place, like if I wasn't juggling so much with being at university, with the bar just having a license rather than a lease, which sort of for those that don't know means effectively I could trade there, but it was almost like a tenancy agreement in that at any point in time the landlord could be like, right, we want it back now. So I didn't have the facility to be able to invest, so it didn't really feel like it was mine. Yep. And didn't want to put loads of my efforts into something that maybe couldn't be that long term. I'd seen other people like in property. I'd seen, you know, they'd been successful in property and kind of had an interest. And it's one of those things that, you know, you kind of know, or a lot of people feel like, you know, when you start to make money, property is like a safe investment. Yep. It's tangible. You can touch it. It's got a great track record, particularly in London. Like, you know, there's been ups and downs, but long term, it's got a really good track record as an investment. It's safe to a degree as well. So just said, yeah, I'm going to put this money that I've made. And then
you just completely scrapped the shisha business. You were like,
so it was again, it's sort of like balance of just a lot of things. Last year, you knew that I couldn't do everything at once. So basically just left the shisha business to go straight into property.
Okay. And then so where did you go to school? Where were you raised?
Crystal Palace.
Okay. So you're a South guy, yeah? Yeah,
so Crystal Palace. I've always kind of been around the same area, Crystal Palace, sort of Catford.
Okay, Penge, okay, cool. Okay, yeah, all right. So you kind of went into property, and when you say you kind of learned from took it from people, was that people you knew or like literally just from afar?
Yeah, like so from some people that I knew, like people that were doing other projects, just kind of like went down to sites, realizing what it takes, how to sort of do things, how you know, kind of see from other people's mistakes. You kind of work out what you would do and how you would sort of navigate a space, like when you're ready to do it.
So did you have a one-on-one mentor, or were you just taking bits and kind of figuring it out yourself?
Not like a one-on-one mentor, but yeah, there was like different people that I was working with. I think it's fortunate as well that like there was people that, you know, people around me as well that were in the space.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a friend of mine was an architect, another friend of mine was a solicitor, and yeah, that kind of allowed me to have like that confidence that we're learning and working together as well.
Okay, fair play. So I think we mentioned earlier, you've done a number of like interviews recently, right? So I was thinking we could change the format slightly of our discussion, and make it a bit more practical and relatable as possible for people who are watching this, especially if they've kind of seen some of your content already. So I was thinking we can have a live case study. I'm going to be an interested investor, right? And you can be my property advisor. So do you do advisory work?
So recently I've started to do like consultations.
Okay.
And effectively it's because I've been pretty busy. Like, you know, like I have like if you follow the page, you know that like, and you've asked me a question, like 99% of the time I'll answer and have like brief conversations. But at a point in time where like there's only so many hours in the day and so much time I can spend, so I can't be going back and forth with people like forever. So I've started to do like consultations effectively, but at a point where I feel like it values my time, but also it's going to offer value for money to the person that wants like a relevant consultation.
Okay.
So it might be about somebody that's interested in, you know, how can they convert a house to flats, and they want to know about title splitting. Somebody that wants to know how they can, I don't know, how they can cost a refurb, you know, what area of property would be good for them to invest in. Maybe they want to get into rent to rent, because I've done like a lot of different things in property. Okay. And have these kind of conversations with people.
All right. So here's the scenario, right? So I'm a full-time worker. This is a made up scenario for the record. So nobody tried to do like some sort of book balancing. This is we're in role play right now. So I work full time. I've managed to save £10,000, and I want to get into the property game. I think the first, when I say property game, like investing in property, I'm going to say a great place to start would maybe be to talk about the different ways of investing. So i.e. rent to rent, HMOs, property development and flips, buy to let. But also I think maybe give us some insight into what investments are best suited to different profiles, right? So for example, people who have low capital, high capital, experienced investors versus like newbies and so on. Yeah.
I think with any like investment or any sort of new venture, you've got to look at what you've got at your disposal. So you mentioned like the person working full time. How much time do you actually have to spend managing this investment? Because if you work like a high pressure job where you're really, you know, time poor, then your chance to get into like a vocation like rent to rent that requires, you know, quite a reasonable amount of time, even though it has lower barriers to entry, it might not be that realistic. Again, so for somebody who's, you know, got more capital but less time, then probably like a more passive buy to let would be a good investment for them. And then in terms of where you invest, the determinants on that will be what you're looking at in the long term. Like, are you looking to sort of grow your capital, like your actual capital pot, or are you looking for a higher income? So if you're looking at income, you'd be quantifying what you'd buy based on yield. So like your return on investment. Whereas if you're looking to grow your capital, you'd maybe be quantifying where you invest and deciding where you invest based on which areas have the highest capital appreciation rates. So these are things that you can just go and Google. You can go,
and I guess that's a personal preference versus what you think not any like particular individual should do.
So my first question to anybody who wants to invest in property is, what do you want out of it? Yeah. Because if I'm talking to you about how to get the best return and the best yield, and you're saying, look, my income's already 6 figures, if you give me an extra £400 a month, it's not going to make any difference to me. At that point in time, maybe yield is not where we should be talking about, and we should be talking about capital appreciation.
They kind of linked in a way, right? So short term, you may want to build capital in order to achieve.
Yeah, like so definitely they're definitely linked. But when you make any investment, that investment is going to be tied to what you want now, because you're making that investment now.
Yeah.
So whether or not you want income in the long term, how you go about achieving that income is, do you want short-term income now, or do you want to grow like a capital pot so you can get maybe more income in the future?
Yeah.
What level of time do you have to invest to make these investments work for you? So like with £10,000, like to be very sort of transparent, like the main barrier to entry to getting into property is capital.
Yeah. And that's literally, so I've got a few subcategories where I was like, okay, let's talk about this, right? And the first one was raising capital, right? So as far as 10K goes, right, are there scenarios where or are there investments where I could potentially go in and say, okay, I've got 10K, I can actually start investing in property? I'm assuming rent to rent, for example.
So rent to rent, typically, you'll get some people that will say you can invest in rent to rent for like no money. I personally wouldn't, advise that. Again, if you've got no money, then you have to start somewhere, but it makes it a lot harder, because there's a few things, like in terms of like obviously your deposit, making the property fit for purpose, so compliant with current regulations, furnishing a property, etc. It's going to make it easier to rent. And just to clarify, just for people who don't know, like rent to rent is effectively getting a rental agreement and renting out individual rooms within that property. Not just so, get rent to rent is renting a property from the owner and then renting it to somebody else. Now that could be on the basis of, you could rent a whole house from the owner and rent the whole house to one family, and it still be rent to rent. You could rent it, and so you've got rent to HMO, which is what you just spoke about. You've got rent to serviced accommodations. That's houses of multiple occupancy. So rent to houses of occupancy where you rent it by the room. Then you've got rent to serviced accommodation. So effectively, that's where you rent a property out, but then it might be a 1-bedroom flat, but then rather than rent it to one person, you rent it out maybe on Airbnb or Booking.com or various other platforms.
And it's perfectly legal, right? Because I think there was a stage where I assumed subletting was illegal.
Yeah, because it has like a negative connotation. Like subletting would have a lot of been time done in breach of contract. But if your contract allows you to sublet, then you can sublet. So that's what I was gonna go on to. That for me,
do you have to seek permission from the?
So you have to seek permission from the owner effectively, or your contract. You have to explain to them what you're doing. Because there's a few things. For a lot of more conventional mortgages, they maybe don't allow like a commercial contract, or like, the type of agreement you need in place to be able to do that. So that the owner would have to seek permission from potentially their lender as well. So that's why you've got to let them know, so they're not in breach of their mortgage. But away from that, your first question about like sort of getting into rent to rent and where to spend money, I would, my starting point would be, okay, where should you spend that money? To start with, spend that money to make sure your contract is fit for purpose. So when I say your contract with the landlord. So your lease agreement you're going to have with that landlord, make sure that protects you and them fairly. Because if you're signing, a 3 to 5 year contract that potentially is, anywhere a couple of £1,000 a month, that's a contract that's going to determine cash flow of 6 figures over that 5 years. So you need to make sure that if it is a really good deal that you've struck, you protect that deal. And if for whatever reason the landlord breaches their terms and you could lose a load of money, you protect yourself. And really that's kind of relatively low investment because technically you can use that it's a contract, you can use it as a template going forward, because you'd use the same one, but just in terms of every business is slightly different. So even if, let's say, I don't know, you were like a barber that had stuff by appointments, you were some kind of like barber that needed a contract for whatever reason, just because of how you operate, you may have a slightly different contract to somebody else, which might be in regards to how you take payment, or late fees, or non-payment, or not showing up to appointments, but you've decided how to run your business. So based on how you run your business, your contract should reflect that.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, so rent to rent, I guess, is would you say, as far as, with regards to capital, that's your kind of the easiest entry point into property if you've got minimal capital?
That, or potentially like deal sourcing as well. Because you could deal source, if you, for example,
what does that mean exactly?
So deal sourcing, it could be in rent to rent, or it could be for flips, or it could be for other types of deals. But effectively what you're doing is you're saying, look, maybe I don't have either the time, the money, or the expertise to execute a deal, but what I can do is spot a good deal. So you could go out there and know that, look, this rent to rent, I know is going to make somebody £800 a month. But I'm not in a position to take it on, or don't have the infrastructure to take it on. But I could package this deal, so I could agree a price in principle with the owner, and then could then sell that deal to somebody else and sell it to them for a commission.
Okay. All right. And so finding deals is actually my second topic, by the way. So I've got raising capital, finding deals, refurbishment, selling properties, or finding tenants, right? So we're going to come to that. Yeah. I do want to come back to the raising capital point, because I think I do believe, this is a random figure, make it like 70% of people who are trying to get into property, that's probably their biggest issue, right? Now, I hear about people who, so I mean, there are obviously ways of raising capital, just going back and saving. As I said, if I'm in that scenario, I'm working full time, saving. But the reality is, especially in today's day and age with bills, etc., that's probably the longest path to getting the capital that you want to be able to invest, right? So what are the other ways people can effectively go, right? I've heard about people kind of getting other people involved in in that deal. Are there other ways that you've heard about people kind of going about raising capital?
Yes, I think like capital raising, like even if you're going to look within your own network or your own community, say, look, this is something I want to start doing, or something I'm doing now and I'm raising money. It's the same as even if you're doing it more commercially or through other means like crowdfunding, etc. You know, what you need to demonstrate to somebody is that you are going to be able to deliver on this deal or deliver. So I think it's kind of chicken and egg. Like, yes, you need money to get into property, but to get money, you also need to sort of show that you can do stuff in property. Yeah. So in a lot of instances, when people ask, like, how can I raise investor finance? Effectively, that's what you're doing. You're saying that, look, we're still going to go to the bank as a principal lender, but I don't have the capital for that deposit that the principal lender is going to want. So I'm going to have to get an investor involved to raise those principal fund. I mean, those sort of the secondary finance, which is a deposit from them. So if I want to go and borrow money from you, and you're in a position to lend, and maybe you're saying, look, I want passive investment, so I'm happy to lend at 5% or 8% or whatever the percentage is that we've agreed, or that you're happy with, why should you give the money to me over somebody else? Yeah. And that's really, I guess, where it starts. Like, why should you give the money to me? So what is it about me that makes like me viable for you to invest?
So effectively, that person needs to put together, similar to a business plan, but
not just a business plan. But when I say why, it's like, you may invest in me because, okay, I've created a track record of doing deals in the past. Okay. So that's obviously, again, chicken and egg. But so maybe not so much that I've just done the deals, but you understand that I understand property. So maybe you have, whether it's an Instagram or a platform or a Facebook or a LinkedIn, where you're actively talking about deals and you're understanding, you know, what they are and what it takes to sort of make a property deal make sense or make it happen. Yep. It's almost like a shop window advertising yourself. Away from that, maybe looking at what you have at your disposal, because you may not have the expertise now, but what you do have is you have a lot of time to be able to deliver that. So you're kind of going out there and you're spending time to research and understand certain things, but also have the time to deliver on a deal that maybe that investor doesn't have because they're in a really sort of time poor, job. Okay. All right. The last thing is then also, if you don't have these things, like, so if you don't have maybe the track record, or don't have as much time, or don't have as much of the expertise, the deal itself is what would raise you the money. If you can go out there and source a really good deal. So let's say, for example, you got an option agreement on this house in Thornton Heath, for example, and you could buy this house for £400,000. But done up, this house is worth 650,000, and you've got to spend £50,000 on it. Even after all the fees and everything, you turn around and look and saying, look, this deal has got maybe £150,000 worth of profit. Yep. And we're going to have to put in 150 odd thousand pounds to do a deal. So if you're turning around and telling an investor, look, like, I'm happy to let you in maybe initially at an equity stake rather than a debt stake, so they get a percentage of the deal rather than a fixed return, their return on investment's amazing. They're looking at it like, well, you know, I want to be part of this deal so much that I'm happy to give you the money because the deal is good.
Yeah, that's probably the best way as far as drawing as in terms of the most attractive package.
For
right?
a lot of people start like that because that's how you get your foot in the door. That's how you make some money, because in that same instance, yes, that's a great deal where you're making 100% return on investment. But if you are able to find really good deals, then you're going to find people that want to invest in them, because everybody wants to make a lot of money just like you are. But then at the end of that deal, even if you split it 50-50 with the investor, you still could make £75,000.
Yeah.
You could then now maybe go and do a deal yourself organically. Or the other thing is you'd have a track record of doing deals, number one. Number two, you'd also have your own capital to put in, so you could now offer a lower percentage to somebody else. So effectively, you don't have to go and find that amazing deal every time, because now you're in a position where you can dictate terms a bit more because you've built up.
So I guess that brings us nicely though into the next section, right? So I think this is probably the hardest part. Personally, that's my personal experience, or what my personal observations is.
Yeah.
Knowing when to spot a deal, knowing how to find a deal. Right? I feel like this area is tough, right? Because I guess raising capital, people struggle, but you know what the game is. It's simple, right? You have X amount, right? Like for example, I have 10K. I know that in order to invest in a certain property, I may need 30K or 50, right? So I need more money. Right, that's pretty straightforward, right? You just need to go find ways about getting that additional income. Finding deals now is another ball game, right? Because some people say you can go on Zoopla and Rightmove and find deals, but I feel like the more experienced people in property have different avenues. So, how do people? I guess the first step is probably learning how to find a deal. And then going about doing it, right? Because learning how to spot a deal.
Yeah.
I think you kind of have to know when a deal is a deal, because often people probably come across deals and don't even know. So I think I'd probably say learning how to spot a deal is probably the first step, and then actually finding those and going out and seeking those deals. Like what would you say?
Yeah, I would say you were right. I'd say a lot of people think the biggest hurdle is the finance, but I think the finance is if you find a good deal, the finance will come. But if you find finance, a good deal won't necessarily come. So exactly. I think you're 100% right. In terms of like how to spot a deal to start with, I think you do have to really just immerse yourself in property. So in terms of if you're looking at, I would say try and specialize in either types of deals. So that could be like office to residential conversions. It could be loft space. It could be, garage conversions. It could just be refurbs, but specialize in something. Because if you're trying to look at everything, it's so hard to do your due diligence and know everything about everything. You can specialize geographically. So you could be looking at different types of deals within a certain area. So you know the price points and ceiling prices within a specific area. So I'd say that as a starting point, try and sort of have some sort of specialization to start with.
And do you have sources like to verify? Is it a case of or do you need to kind of go out and get formal valuations versus prices? And
so you can, in terms of, so that was literally going to be my next point. Like, in terms of working out if something's a deal or not, obviously, if there's a clear selling price, to know if it's a deal, you need to know what your resale price is, or your GDV, your gross development value. Yep. And being able to determine accurately what a GDV of a deal is effectively by you being able to look at those comparables of what's sold locally within the area within a reasonable sort of time frame, reasonable proximity, and saying what am I likely to achieve at kind of a worst case, middle, and best case scenario, and taking like a mean of that. And then really you can then reverse engineer stuff and work it backwards. So say, okay, look, if this is what it's going to be worth at the end, and then an element of like either if you don't know yourself, either getting those quotes from a builder in to work out how much it's going to cost you from a works perspective, what are your professional fees going to be like architectural, planning consultants, and different things on that basis. What are your transactional costs, like your solicitor fees and your stamp duty, which you can work out.
Yep.
Because you'll know your stamp duty. You can use a stamp duty calculator to tell you exactly what that's going to be. You will then have all of those costs. You'll know your GDV, and you'll also know what profit you need or what profit you want. So you can then work out, okay, is my purchase price, do I achieve that within that, and kind of work it backwards. And if you don't, you know that then, okay, realistically, regardless of what the property is being marketed for for this to be a deal for me, this is what I can then offer.
Okay, so I guess that's spotting a deal and calculating whether that's a deal, right? And I guess the art or the experience and the skill comes from actually finding them.
Yeah, and that's where I mentioned about obviously sort of specializing, because if, for example, you're working on office to residential conversions, there's going to be 100 different things that, you know, that building needs to have to mean that it's likely to be ripe for conversion from office to residential.
So permissions, etc.
Yeah, and like it needs to have certain sizes. It needs to have certain requirements. If you might have to do like a parking survey or certain things to do with light and things like that. But understanding what those are, which is why we spoke about specialization. But the market's very tough because right now we're in like a bull market. Prices are going up. People are overpaying for stuff, and a lot of people have that experience and know, you know, what if it's obvious that it can be converted into flats, or obvious that something could be refurbed for £50,000 and is going to go significantly up in value. What's going to happen is competition and supply and demand is going to erode that margins, and people are going to compete on price and pay more and more until the point that it's not a deal anymore. Like I've been to viewings where, like, you know, there was 30 people at the viewing and 20 of them offered because the property was underpriced, and then it ended up, market forces pushed that property up, and then it ended up not being a deal because the person who got the property ended up overpaying.
And so I'm assuming that would be at an auction.
No, it was just that it was a good deal on Zoopla. So
everybody
wanted to,
okay, so you can find deals on Zoopla.
Yeah. I find like literally my last like 3 or 4 properties I bought on Zoopla, Rightmove, etc.
But is that because you're making offers?
So or even offers, like the idea of like,
were they listed below market value?
They were listed at market value based on what was obvious about the property. But the expertise is what's going to show you why you can maybe, because if you're looking at a property that's listed for £500,000, and even with a refurb of 50,000, it's going to be worth 550. That's not below market value.
Yeah, okay.
But if I can do something to that property where maybe I say, look, I'm going to spend 70, but it's going to make it worth 700, then it is below market value for me, and it's based on what I've seen I can do with that property, and that's where.
So there definitely it kind of goes back to knowing the game and doing the research and specializing.
Yeah, no, so like now in this current market, like it's hard. Like even for myself, like that knows kind of how to spot a deal and how to spot a property with potential. There's a lot of people that do that. There's a lot of information online, on YouTube, on Instagram, on, you know, various other platforms, where there's a lot of people that know a lot about a property. So a strategy that I've been implementing more recently is almost looking for properties with problems that I can solve. Okay. So whether that be something that puts people off, it could be subsidence, it could be Japanese knotweed, it could be an issue with, you know, an absentee freeholder.
They disclose that, right?
Yeah, well, that's maybe the reason why it's not sold. So I go and see that, okay, this is, you know, it might have been sitting on the market for a while, and I'm saying, okay, why is this, or why is it, you know, why is this not sold? Like, what is the issue with that, and try and resolve it. So it's something that hopefully I'm gonna exchange on tomorrow.
Okay, that's a good strategy.
Yes, it's something I'm gonna exchange on tomorrow. It's been at auction, didn't sell at auction. Wow. It was available for 175,000. Yeah, it didn't sell because effectively it had an issue on the title that was a constraint that meant you couldn't register a charge. So basically you couldn't get a mortgage or any lending against the property because there was a condition from the previous owner to say that no charges could be
so you have to cash buy it effectively.
But however, that company that put put that in place has now been liquidated. They don't exist. So they can't remove it, but you can't. No, but it's still valid in law. You still can't do anything about it in the short term. But there's obviously ways in which that you can work that out, and it's just a case of, okay, if I can solve that problem, I can then buy this property that, in reality, is worth a lot more. It's probably worth, on a normal day, is selling for 225.
Okay, so do you use auctions? Do you think that's still an avenue?
Yeah, I still use. I follow where the money makes sense. So like, I wouldn't not look on Zoopla. I wouldn't not look at auction. Okay. I wouldn't not use a sourcer.
You're putting work.
Yeah, I would go, like, if I'd look at any, I still look at auctions. I still look online. I still engage with sources, and I still do some direct to vendor stuff. But effectively,
sources are effectively like estate agents who
So that they effectively
look for
properties for investors, like specifically for investors, specifically properties that, in their opinion, have a margin, have the ability to add a margin on that property and increase the value. And as a result, you would pay them a fee on the basis that they're selling you a product that can make you money.
Okay. And then as far as property investment, because again, I guess this came up for me as we go back to our case study. Would it be, some people go in as a company and some invest as an individual? What would you say? I guess there's benefits and pros and cons for either, potentially, right?
It's a question for you.
No, but I'm not from a tax perspective, but just generally
but
in
that's
terms
literally, generally,
is that the driver?
It's a tax perspective.
Okay,
so
okay.
In terms of why you would, like, there's a misconception sometimes that people say it's always better to be in a company name, because there were changes that meant that you could no longer claim the interest element of a buy-to-let property if it's in a personal name, but you can still do that in a company name. Which means for a lot of people, the company structure makes more sense. Also, another reason is from a tax perspective, you could sell a company as opposed to selling a property, which means it'd be more a tax efficient way.
Okay, so tax is the main driver as far as
of structure. Tax is generally going to be the main driver, because there's there's all sorts of things. Property a lot of the time is long term. There's inheritance benefits sometimes from a company structure, but most of the requirements come down to tax. The other side of it is, if you're maybe more of a casual investor, just the transactional costs of setting up a company, having another set of accounts. Okay. So they're all sort of financial.
What about lending? Because I guess you don't have to necessarily, it's not directly on your personal credit.
Yeah, it still is though. So in most instances, if you're a new company, even if you set up a company, like a limited company, which is a separate entity, in most instances, you would have to sign a PG, like a personal guarantee, as the director, and anybody that owns over 25% would have to sign these documents when borrowing. And it's really kind of, when I say tax and finance, because you probably get a lower rate in a personal name than you would in a company name on your interest on a buy-to-let mortgage. But again, it's all the case of pros and cons. So yes, you get a lower rate, but if you can't claim the tax, you can't claim the interest as an expense, then it's which one works out better for you. Then the other side of it is do you need to, the thing that's the downside for some people is, do you need that money from your buy-to-let as income? Do you need it personally? Because if you do, you're not only going to pay your corporation tax, you're then going to have to pay yourself that money from the company. So then you're going to be paying your dividends as well. And what tax bracket do you sit in and stuff like that? So, but yeah, mostly it's I would advise most people to consult with a financial advisor or or a tax specialist beforehand to know which option is best for them.
Okay, fair. Okay, so going back to the scenario, right? So I had my 10K. I found a deal on Zoopla. I thought it was a deal. I presented it to a number of people. I managed to get my investment up to 50K, right? I had a few people buy in with the expectation that they're going to get a return. Now, I found this property, as you mentioned, similar property in, I don't know, St. John's Wood, unlikely for the money I'm about to say, but $500,000, 500K. Could potentially be worth 700. But it requires work.
Yeah.
It needs some refurbishment. Now, I feel like most people encounter refurbishments on their personal places, right? On their personal homes and their personal spaces. But as far as when you're looking to refurb a property, do you look at it, do you kind of think, okay, I'm just going to go low end and make sure it looks presentable? Are you thinking kind of where are you finding these specialists? Are you kind of, what are kind of some of the guidance and tips that people can kind of have an idea about? Because again, the amount of rogue traders there are in this world is crazy.
I think in terms of how much money you spend on a refurb, again, I would always work it backwards, in that, how much money do I want to sell the property for? And then that will justify how much I can spend on your second fix, so the stuff that people actually see, so your actual bathroom suites, your kitchens, your light fittings, your radiators, etc. Because that's where you'll see the difference in terms of what goes behind the walls. The pipes are the same, sort of regardless. If you're doing a full refurb, the wiring's the same, etc. So work out, you know, that okay, if I spend an extra £10,000 on my refurb, what do I hope to achieve off my back end? Because if you're not, for every pound you spend, making a pound back, you shouldn't be doing it.
Okay.
So I like, you know, if the tiles are, if you're gonna you're gonna have no difference really in your end values, whether you sort of spend £500 on tiles or 2,000, you should probably spend the £500.
Okay.
But obviously, if that's gonna make you an extra £5,000 in terms of what.
And how do you determine that though?
Well, you look at your comparables and see like the standard of refurb, because what other people have done and what they've sold for, like your actual sold comparables. Speak to your agents in terms of, you know, briefly, because they're going to be working within the industry day in, day out, selling properties day in, day out, understanding
and
why.
Do you get them in physically, or is it just like a phone call?
It can be a conversation. You could potentially get them in physically, and they would come in because, you know, agents now obviously they're very busy, but you know, when the market's more competitive and they want properties to sell, they'll probably be happy to have a conversation on the basis of, look, can give you some advice, because if you're going to give us the property to sell on the back end.
Fair. Okay. All right. So you would say refreshment, work backwards and figure out what you want to spend.
Yeah, like I have, like, you know, in terms of refurb, some people like will go off real industry standards of, okay, it's this price per square meter for plastering, for painting, for tiling, for like, I'd kind of initially, when I'm just working out if a deal's viable or not, I have like a very baseline. It's like if I'm doing a straightforward refurb, I don't want to spend more than sort of 10% of the total GDV on the refurb. So if I want to sell a flat for £500,000, I don't want to spend more than £50,000 on a refurb. It's generally probably a bit lower than that, but it just kind of means that I can quite quickly kick stuff off as viable, not viable from a starting point. And then really look at like the ceiling prices of what, like that's the main thing. Am I going to get a return on investment for this extra spend?
Okay.
And who am I selling to? Like the other thing is understanding your target market, because in any industry, who you're selling to is important, because that's going to determine whether or not your item sells.
Yeah, of course.
It's the same anywhere, and it's exactly the same in property. So that could be the difference between, is it a 1-bedroom flat that's most likely going to be bought by a first-time buyer that's a sole occupant, you know, a city professional that maybe would just love just a shower if you've got a small bathroom, or maybe it's like if it's a 2-3-bedroom flat that's going to be maybe a second home, family of young children, you're going to need a bath because they're probably going to have kids. Looking at what the balance is of what's going to work from you, what's going to get you more value. Is it the ensuite bathroom or is it a walk-in wardrobe? And really try and envisage who's going to live there. Okay. And I think why a lot of my projects have done well is whether or not I'm doing like a HMO where we're going to be renting out the rooms for £500, or I'm doing like a new build house where we're going to be selling it to somebody for 7 figures. I'm trying to think, what would that person want from this property, and what would they value within the property?
Okay, that's dope. So
trades, finding good trades you spoke about.
So because I know checker trade is not the one.
Yeah.
Not to like throw dirt on their name,
like, but it's not. Yeah, I don't think just checker trade in general, but just like whether it's my builder, my like there's loads of similar rated
you still
people,
just
etc.
use the web to find new people.
No, so because I work really focused, like I now have kind of like my own team, and then also even if I need more people, I've got people that I've been using for a long time. I think the web is really good, but like, you know, use the web like we use the web for everything. You can analyze if somebody wants to know if this podcast is good, they can go in the comment section. Like, you know, a lot of building companies now will have their own Instagram. Go and look at what the feedback like is like within their own social media. Also, a good builder is going to have active sites that they're working on. Go and see these sites, speak to previous clients, actually get these personal recommendations from people that they've worked with. It depends on obviously the size of the job and your experience, but definitely kind of take time to put like a mini tender pack together, even for smaller projects. A lot of the time, I also,
and that you give that to the workmen, so they know what they're getting themselves into.
So they know effectively, look, this is what I want you to do. Can you quote for everything within this pack? Because then there's not like an assumption, I just thought you were going to do this. Because communication is probably one of the main reasons why a lot of people have issues with their builders, because there's a lot of assumptions that I just assumed that this was included, or I assumed that this wasn't included. So I would also, early on, I would always write the contract. I wouldn't let a builder give me a contract. I would create the contract for works and then they would then have time to go and review it and make sure they're happy with it, make sure they're happy with the payment terms and the schedules that are included, and just try and obviously mitigate your risk as much as possible.
Okay. So your, I guess, contracts, are you kind of formally issuing contracts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I think we spoke like before we turned on. We spoke about like just contracts in general, and I like a contract, like because it's just with, if we're doing business and in property, like the main thing we speak about is capital. We're talking about a lot of money a lot of the time.
Yep.
A lot of money to me, to them, to everybody involved. If we're both serious people, there should be no issue of either party signing a contract, because they want to protect the money I'm supposed to pay them, and I want to have protection over the job that I'm going to receive. Okay. And if it's not done properly by either party, there should be somewhere where we can go to get resolution, as opposed to just falling out and being like, I have to get another contractor in. This is messed up. Of course.
Okay, that's good. I hear that. All right, so I've bought this place. I've got investors. I've now refurbed it to a standard of someone I believe would either buy or rent the place. Now, we're going to go down two roads. One, buy-to-let, one, development to flip, right? Mm-hmm. To sell that property, is it just simply listing it on Zoopla, estate agents, kind of getting it gone, kind of revaluing it, I'm assuming, first, right? And then...
Yeah, so effectively, your agents initially... you get probably multiple agents in to give you an opinion of what they think it's worth now in its current state, depending on who you feel, not just who says they can sell it for the most, but also who you feel most confident actually going to sell it for that price. So if you've got one agent that comes in and says, oh yeah, we're going to sell it for 750, but everybody else has come in and said 7, use that maybe to your benefit to negotiate maybe a sliding scale with that agent. Say, oh, look, if you sell it for more than 700, then I'll give, or more than 725, I'll give you 1 point whatever %. If you sell it for less than this and it drops down on the basis that they're the one that's come in and said they can sell it for this amount, and also who you feel has been active in the area, who's likely to actually sell
it
the
stops them from like
for you.
Giving the buyer like that, oh, he would accept an offer.
Because they effectively have got vested interest. Exactly. The more they sell it for, the higher percentage they'll get.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and then so that, I guess that's selling. What if we went down the HMO or just buy to let? So
yes, I mean HMO would obviously depend on the type of property and if it was fit for purpose to be a HMO.
And you can Google that, right, in terms of like to find the criteria.
Yeah, so like you've got like national standards, but then individual like councils have their own standards, and there's things like Article 4, which effectively a council can invoke, and it removes the permitted development rights, which means a property can't just be converted to a HMO like by applying for a license. You actually have to go for a full planning application as if you were converting it into flats, for example. Okay. But from a HMO, if you were going to go down the HMO route, really that should be part of your thought process from day one as part of your refurb, because there's things you would need to put in place like fire safety, bathrooms, etc. Just even the layout in general to maximize it as a HMO. Okay. And then you would get, like, generally speaking, a specific HMO lender. But the good thing about HMOs are, because you have an increased like rental amount for the property, sometimes you can get a better LTV, which is your loan to value. Okay. So whereas on a typical buy to let, your maximum's generally speaking like 75% loan to value, on a HMO specific HMO product, you could maybe get 85%, which means you get more money out of the property when you refinance.
15% deposit,
in terms of refinance versus selling, from just a sort of purely fiscal answer, like it kind of depends on obviously how profitable the project is, how much of your own money you can get back out if you were going to refinance. So if you could get out 100% of your money, then you'd be like, do you know what? I had enough money to start. I can pay back my investors. I can pay back whichever my other money that I've expended. I can get my own money back and maybe go again. Yep. But if you can't do that and you have investors, then probably it would be a lot easier to flip the property, because then you get all of their money back out plus the profits. You can pay them, and then you've got money to go again yourself. Okay, yeah. You would need to bear in mind that you would then have the difference between the two primarily is that you would have a tax liability if you sell the property, so a capital gains tax if you were to sell, versus if you just refinance and pull money out, you don't pay capital gains on a refinance.
Okay. And I guess you can refinance it, find a tenant, keep that there, and use that capital to go in again, right, and build your portfolio.
Depending on obviously how much money you take out, because in a different scenario, again, I'm not going to kind of bombard you with numbers.
Because when you say refinance, also that's on the basis that the value of the property has gone up.
Gone up significantly as well.
Okay,
Because if you were to buy that property, you said if you were to buy that property for 500,000 and you bought it on a buy-to-let mortgage to start with, just for example, so you bought it for, you had £125,000 at 25% in it day one, and you then did a refurb of a further £50,000.
Yep.
So you've now got 175,000 plus your stamp duty, which is probably another 25,000 on that amount. So you've now got £200,000 of your own money in that property, and you owe the bank 375. If you were to go back and refinance, and say that they said, okay, the property is now worth 750,000, for example. If you were to go back to the bank, they're going to offer you a loan again of 75% of your new value.
Okay.
Which means they're going to effectively want you to keep in 180
of your own money,
of your own money, but of that would predominantly be the uplift that you've achieved. Okay. So you'd get basically all of your money back out, but you'd be keeping all of that profits effectively in the property itself. And then my response to why I don't generally do that, and to go full circle in regards to the question about the about my portfolio, is if you've kept £180,000 worth of profit in a property, you've now got a property that, you know, let's say if it says a buy-to-let, it's making you £800 a month. So over the course of a year, it's making you £9,600. My thing is, do I think I have the ability to make more than £9,600 from that 182,000? And if your answer is yes, because you've just done it, and you feel like you have the time and you feel like you can go and find another similar deal, then why not continue doing that? And at the point in time you don't have an appetite to do flips anymore, then you let your money be more residual and kind of have more of a passive income.
Okay. And so again, personal decision, right? In terms of how much time you can invest, how much capital you've got. Okay, cool. No, so there's definitely some dope gems in there, yeah? So I'm going to go into something like, so from your experience, are there any kind of current tips or gems you've got as far as where to invest right now? Like what areas?
Like there's like, listen, I think a gem or a tip that I would say more so is that we're in like this internet era where there's so much free information out there online. There's like, you know, I could point you in the direction of Tej Talks, Luke's Properties, Alfred Daisy, countless other people that are in great stuff, all in different areas. Some people are operating in Wales, some people in Birmingham, some people all over, and like all of those people are giving out great free advice online about how to invest. And I only invest in London, which isn't going to be ideal for a lot of people and might be perfect for some people. Yep. But more so, I'd say there's so much good information out there online that literally immerse yourself into this free content. And then obviously there are people that are selling additional courses or additional like consultations on top of that. But why not take advantage of all the free information out there to start with, work out where you're at, work out who kind of has synergy with your own personal goals or your own personal areas that you like to operate in, and then maybe start to work with them more directly.
Okay, that's fair. And then what about the types of properties to go for? So for example, what I've been told recently is there's a higher demand now for gardens, given the COVID situation and people work from home. People want that space, right? And also people are open to living a bit further outside of London now, right? Whereas they used to be, city professionals wanted to be in zone 1, zone 2, right? Now they're happy to be in zone 3 and zone 4 because they don't have to be in the office 5 days a week, right? So what other properties would you say actually like, these are types of?
I would say that's very right. But like, say for example, you're saying, okay, you know that people are happy to pay more for gardens. It doesn't mean that you should just then go out and buy garden flats, because if you're buying garden flats at a premium because they've already gone up, if you luckily owned a load of garden flats beforehand, then you're quid's in because your stock's gone up in value. But it's all about what can I buy it for and what can I sell it for? And I probably say this on every interview or podcast I do, but you make your money when you buy. So if you can buy a garden flat for cheap right now, even if maybe it's not in, like, you know, if it's a cheap garden flat but has the potential, has a lot of potential, you're probably maybe looking at a good, good investment.
So potential is a key
But,
word.
but it's
though,
all
isn't it?
about what can it be worth, because it doesn't matter if you can find a great garden flat. If it's not going to be worth much more when you do your refurb, it's still not a good deal.
Yeah, of course.
So
that's it. You're looking for potential in most.
So
in
yeah,
most places
and
you search for,
and the money comes from seeing the potential that other people have missed.
Okay.
So if there's a property where there's the potential, so like this first deals that I started doing, they were they weren't conversions, but they were renovations where I would be redesigning the layout. And a lot of the time making a 1 bed to a 2 bed just by moving some partitions.
That's a lot of work though. You said that's your first type of property.
Yeah, they were the first.
Wow.
Because they were like the first. They were, but it's just what, like, I could, if for example, I put up a stud wall there and had like, we could now say this is 2 studios. And I put up a stud wall and have like a separate recording bit over there.
Yeah.
That's not loads of work, but it's just, is there a demand for that? Would people be happy with 2 smaller studios? Because the person who owns this might turn around and say, yeah, do you know what? I was renting it for this amount before. Now I'm getting slightly less over there because I put that partition up, but then I'm renting it out twice. And the same kind of thing goes with, okay, if I've added an extra bedroom, how much more would somebody pay? So when I was looking at these deals, I'm saying I'm buying this flat for £200,000. If I refurb that flat for £30,000 as a 1 bedroom flat, it's now worth 250. So is it a deal? Yeah, but by the time you take into account the finance cost, the stamp duty, the solicitor fees, the selling costs, you're probably just about going to break even. So it's not really a deal. It's just somewhere that's nice to buy. It's decent value for money.
Because that's how experience is
but that's how everybody's seeing it. But then for me, that I'm looking at, okay, I can do that same refurb for that same £30,000, but I'm now going to make it a 2 bed.
Yep.
I'm going to hope to sell it for £300,000. So that property is cheap to me, or is below market value to me, based on what I plan to do with that property.
Okay.
So a lot of the time, the money, particularly on the open market deals and the stuff that, isn't from a source or isn't direct to vendor, comes from seeing the opportunity that isn't obvious.
Okay. All right. And again, and that goes back to your point around immersing yourself in
because obviously experience is going to speak for a lot. But then I speak to people that are, I met up with, I forget his name now, but his friend of Poku Banks, and like they're like 20 and 21, and they're deal sourcing 7-figure deals, and they've made enough money off the back of these deal sourcing, and they're now going to start doing their own deals. Yep. They've never done a deal in their life, so they don't have that experience, but they're able to identify what was good value for money.
Yep.
Sell that on to people, take that, take the money they made from that, and now they're going to start doing some of their own deals.
Okay, makes sense. I guess one thing with regards to just property investment in general, are there any, because I guess we've definitely got a number of gems and tips that you've kind of given, and a lot of it is putting the work in. I think with anything in life, you got to put work in, right? You got to do your own research, right? But you must have had some experience of things that people trip up on, or maybe things that people should avoid, right? Are there any things that kind of just top of mind that you think?
Yeah, like I would say, like, particularly for people that have capital. So maybe you've been successful in another career, or you've made money, or you've inherited money, or you've got money, whichever. And then a lot of people go straight to auctions. But auctions, there can be good deals in auctions, but there's also a lot of rubbish in auctions. And also you're committed day one. Like the second that hammer drops, auction is calling you over to say, right, where's your deposit? Where's your this? Like, here, you got to pay your 10%.
On the spot?
On the spot, there and then. Like, so you have to do your due diligence in advance. So I would say, don't wait forever to buy your first property, but make sure that first property that you do buy isn't the property that loses all your money. So do that kind of relevant due diligence, particularly on auction properties where you don't have the time to do your conveyancing in advance. Make sure you get like a professional review of the legal pack if you're not versed in how to read legal packs. Potentially maybe try and get a survey in, just so, because you could do that at an open day and you could get that done. And yes, it's going to cost you money, but £500 to maybe not lose £20,000 is a great investment.
For sure, 100%. Bit of a personal question, but what are you currently reading, watching, listening to, whether it's property related or otherwise? Just to
so like my mind is so like property focused that when I'm sort of trying to unwind, I try and do the opposite. So like even when I read, like being dyslexic, I always try to sort of read just for enjoyment as opposed to reading educational, because I found it harder to focus and I just sort of get lost and find myself skim reading, not really taking it in.
Yeah.
So I'm reading like a series of books by it's the Jack Reacher series. I can't remember who it's by. But it's just fiction. It's just like, that's kind of like what I enjoy. They're kind of like sort of like airplane.
But you read,
books.
right? And that's how regularly do you read?
Yeah, I've read I think it's a series of like 32 books, and I think I'm on like 24.
Wow, that's impressive.
So yeah.
So because I feel like for me, reading is something like I've got a stack of books. When I'm on holiday, I find it a lot easier.
Yeah.
It's like I'm in a lounger. Like you really got no excuse. But here I'm like, for example, like I've been working all day, rushing around, then I got business stuff, and then I'll get back. I've still got to do more work, but I still want to read every day. But I'm just like, by the time I get into bed, I just want to throw something on a show on TV.
I don't think there's anything wrong with like unwinding. I think like reading or like playing PlayStation or watching something. It's just there's an important to have like an element of you time and an element of sort of time to switch off. So that people that know me know that like I'm either, if it's not work, it's either Call of Duty or it's poker.
Okay.
Like
you're a poker man, yeah. So I'm on this PlayStation thing, but I'm like a Street Fighter guy. You know what it is? Like, the Call of Duty, I feel like I fell off a few games for a bit, and then by the time I come back on,
like, don't get me wrong, if I'm not good at a game, I'm not playing it. I used to play FIFA, I'm not good at it.
By the time you come on, man are just shooting you before you even start.
Yeah, that's crazy. It. But then it's glad, you have to hone your craft. Like we spoke about anything. Like so Street Fighter, if we go and play Street Fighter now and you smack me off, I'm not gonna play it again. I don't like losing.
This is a proper thing. All right, now fair. All right. And then just in terms of like investing in the current climate, I think as you mentioned, it's a bull market. The values are going up. Like, do you think it's a good time currently, or is there no wrong time? Or do you think there's a patience in it? Because I was told over the last few months maybe to just hold fire. Maybe the market's a bit inflated.
Yeah, like the market probably is slightly inflated at the moment. There's been a lot of things, that potentially, like a lot of general sort of monetary and fiscal policy that have kind of maybe slightly artificially inflated the market. I don't think we've really seen the knock-on effects of COVID and of Brexit. There was a lot of things in place like the stamp duty holiday, mortgage holidays, like no evictions that were kind of propping up.
Furlough.
Yeah, and furlough as well. Like all these things that were kind of maybe artificially propping up the economy as a whole, but more so a lot of them focused around property. That being, and the other side of it is like market forces tend to kind of follow to a degree, like the stock market and other markets as well, and they're all deemed as, like, for those that kind of believe in the cycles, like that they're quite cyclical, and they happen like I think it's every 12 years in property. So in reality, market last crashed in 2008 should have really crashed last year.
Okay. So I mean, it could be on the horizon, or it just may not come.
Yes, it could be on the horizon, but then the other thing is that the property market as a whole, particularly like the London property market, props up like a lot of the it props up a lot of the country as well, from like gross like GDP, like a lot of the gross domestic product of the country as a whole. So like they're keen to sort of keep that buoyant as well and protect the economy as a whole. In terms of should I not invest now, shouldn't I invest now, I think if you're looking as from an owner-occupier perspective, there's an element of long-term investment there. So, that short-term, you may find that you may get a dip for a period. Particularly investing in London, those dips are they're more negligible, because the London property prices, because of demand, is more insulated from market forces.
Yeah.
Outside of London, I'd say definitely, you kind of need to do a bit more due diligence, because we have seen that sort of more volatile price changes. Yeah. But in London, when you look at it more holistically, like prices go up over the long term. Yeah.
But one thing I will say is, though, if there was a crash, you want to be in a position where when you have the capital, because effectively that will make could like make millions. That could change people's lives as far as if you get in at the right time, right?
Some of my like I was investing in property 2012, so that I've been doing. So I always say 7 years, and I realize it's like 9 when I actually do it now. But it's like 2012, and prices there were sort of slowly starting to creep up. But yeah, they were some of my best investments because I was fortunate enough to have capital at a point in time where prices were low. But that being said, like if you do a deal now and you do a deal, if like for example, if you've got money now and you can do a deal that makes you £50,000 in a 6-month period, and then you do another deal that makes you another £50,000 in a 6-month period, you've made £100,000. If you go to do your third deal and prices drop and they drop by, I don't know, whatever the price may be, like they drop by a certain percentage, which means that deal that was supposed to make you another 50, you actually only end up making 10. Mm-hmm. You're still £110,000 better off, or you're still.
I feel like that's a good scenario though, because it can go all the way wrong. As far as like it could drop at the wrong time.
It could it could drop at the wrong time, but then that's your numbers. So like, how insulated does your deal make you from those market forces? Because if you were hoping to make £50,000 and property prices drop by 10% overnight, you know, and the property price was 500,000, you're still going to break even.
Yeah.
And I guess it's how bad does it get? And it's just, I guess it's attitudes towards risk as well. Because I very much think that, you know, in terms of if you're looking at doing flips, you need to pay more attention to how you feel the market's going and potentially wait a little bit longer. But for longer term investments, like, you know, you're there for the long term. So if you don't get the right valuation, you can still potentially refinance for an uplift. And
even during a crash.
Yeah, and you go back in after a year and you go on like a variable rate product, which means you don't have a tie and you don't have an early redemption penalty. When prices go up after a year, you refinance and get more money out, and then you go again. If you're trying to flip something, you need to be sort of a bit more careful, but maybe obviously also kind of trying to hedge your risk through properties with multiple exit strategies. So you may have one as a flip and one as a refinance.
Okay.
But effectively, if you're adding value, and if you're adding significant value, then you insulate yourself from those market forces by the added value.
Okay. All right. No, honestly, I think there's so much for people to take in and kind of digest. And again, I think there's a consistent themes as far as people really need to put the work in. I guess one thing I will say is, if you don't have the time to kind of immerse yourself in property, right? Because this is a thing, right? So we'll think people are doing well in business or there's careers.
And also, if you're great at business, like you have a great business idea, property is probably never going to make you as much money as that business. So I would say invest. If you've got a really good business idea, like what do you do? Like you make coffee, for example, and you know that your coffee is the best, and you know that it can like make you money. The return on investment you're going to get from investing in yourself is probably way more than any property investment strategy you're going to get.
Yep.
And property maybe be something that you get into at a point in time that you have way more disposable income from your business.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So I guess it's, but you're kind of back to that question though, where people have the capital or the consistent income, but no time and no expertise, do they find someone like you?
So potentially, some people, like they could. So like just from a compliance perspective, people need to understand that, you know, that like, so non-regulated lending, if you're deemed as like a non-sophisticated investor, so have like less than £150,000, then we can't really like market directly for investment to you. And you know that example you gave earlier about having multiple investors on one project, you can only have a sole investor to comply with FCA, like FCA financial conduct authority, like regulation. So you need to be careful with that, and be careful who you're investing with, because there's an element of making sure that they're compliant. But away from the compliance side of things, it would make sense, you know, to potentially invest with somebody quite passively for that investment. If, for example, it's somebody that maybe you feel like you're happy to have a longer term relationship with, because any investment could be a relationship. Maybe it could be more of a partnership where you invest as an equity investor rather than debt. So you get a percentage of the uplift in value rather than just a fixed return on your investment.
Okay.
There's also other things like a lot of people are putting in place now, which is something that I'm going to be getting involved in more over the next couple of years, but effectively crowdfunding options. So, you know, like, you know, an Amazon stock is however much, like, you know, Bitcoin is however much. They're ridiculous amounts. So not everybody can buy a stock in Amazon or can buy a Bitcoin, but through like platforms like Trading 212 or Binance or various other things, you can buy percentages of investments.
Okay.
There's people that are putting like crowdfunding options where you can do the same in property. And at the moment, a lot of the entry is like £1,000.
Yeah, but when you see some of those returns, though, often I see the numbers and I think, but maybe it's because I've seen other industries where you can make money, like different amounts of money. So sometimes I see the return and I think, over the course of that period, I'm not sure that's the best use of my funds.
But it's about risk and reward, isn't it? Because if you're investing in like a property deal with, like, say for example, someone like I said, like, okay, look, I'm gonna put my deal on a crowdfunding platform that offers like a 20% return.
That's quite high though. You rarely see that, I think.
But from crowdfunding, you see it.
Okay.
So from crowdfunding, because you're offering equity, not debt. Okay. So it's unsecured and against it lets the deal successful. Okay. So you're basically saying, okay, I'm happy to take a bit more risk, but then your risk is to a degree hedged over the experience of that investor. Say I was to put a deal on crowdfunding and you've seen, okay, this is somebody that's delivered like, you know, tens of millions of worth of property deals over a history. They've got a track record of making significant sums of money. They've done this many within areas that I can see. I can get recommendations from people that they've raised money from in the past. They've raised over £1 million worth of private equity. So there's a lot of stuff that gives you an element of security. You then see that, okay, they're offering like a 20% equity stake, and you know you can start at £1,000. Yeah. In terms of, there might be some stuff that's more attractive to you, but in terms of the risk and reward, and also the fact that, you know what, you've actually invested in property. So yes, it's like an equity stake within a business, but your investment is tied to a specific property. The security for those potential investors, you know, is deemed for them as a lot higher and maybe a viable investment. But like with any investment, it's down to what you want, what are your attitudes towards risk.
Yeah, risk appetite, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. No, honestly, that's dope, man. So much education in it. So yeah, as part of this Let Me Have Five podcast, right?
I have to give you a fiver.
We'll get to that.
Didn't bring
we'll get to that. We're jumping. But we have 5 quick fire questions. You got 10 seconds to answer each question. Straightforward questions. It's just like first thing that comes to your head, just to get an idea of where your mind's at and
forward. Kind of, I like to be right. I like to win.
Okay.
I don't know if you can win, but I'm gonna try and win.
It's personal. So there's no. I wouldn't say there's no right or wrong answers. It's just like an insight.
I want to feel like I win.
Yeah, it's more of an insight into where you are right now.
In the comments, can you let me know if I won? Answer these questions.
All right. So let me know when you're ready.
I'm good. So let me move the mic in close so you can hear this.
All right. Cool. One thing that you can't live without.
Call of Duty.
One thing. Call of Duty. One thing that you need to be successful. Luck. Cool. Are you religious?
I'm Muslim.
Okay. One thing that brings you happiness.
Call of Duty.
So funny, you know.
I really like this game. Do you know what though? Recently, root beer.
What you on?
Have you tried root beer?
Root beer, what is that?
It's like a drink. It's like an amazing drink.
No.
But people hate it, but I really like it at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So, because I've got the latest. So you got PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
I've got the latest Call of Duty. Is it the Modern Warfare 2? Right? Is it one of them?
Yeah. But like there was a newer one. But basically, what I play is Warzone, which is like it's like cross-platform. So it's between like the different versions of Call of Duty. But it's like the we're gonna mad digress and like people just switch it up. But it's just it's basically like the battle royale mode where you land in. There's like 150 people. And it's like last person left alive wins.
Okay, all right. We'll speak more on that. All right, cool. Back to the question. If you had one wish, what would it be?
That's grand. Like what?
Literally, bro. First thing that comes to your head. If you literally had a genie now, he said 10 seconds, you got 5, 4, or nothing.
I'd solve my sister's health problems.
Okay, still. One thing that you would advise a younger version of you.
Enjoy the journey. That we only get this one life, this one time. Like, you know, if you're spending too long focusing on where you're trying to get to, like enjoy the little wins along the way. Yeah. Because they what will drive you to get to where you want to be in the long term.
That's dope, bro. Now, where can listeners connect with you, bro?
So, Property by Kazy, all one word, on Instagram, same on YouTube, same on Facebook. Primarily, I'm on Instagram, but we're really actively trying to grow the YouTube now. So Property by Kazy on YouTube, I think at this point in time, probably at like 3,500 subscribers. So trying to get those numbers up.
Yep.
Gonna have loads of great content coming out there, and not just for our age group, but I've got my 2 interns, Kai and Kai. They're like 12 now. They're learning a lot from me, but they're gonna start teaching. I feel like kids learn better from kids their own age. So they're gonna have like a little something on the channel where they talk about property investment and hopefully do more stuff like that. I'm sponsoring Most Wanted Elite football team, so big up them. They're just smashing it in South London, winning loads of leagues. So I'm gonna hopefully start doing some of that financial literacy stuff with those guys over there. And then each and every Sunday on Instagram Live, ask someone else. We get an industry professional and to talk property.
That's dope, bro, man. First, I'm gonna say, bro, appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me on, my bro.
Obviously, you're a busy person, as people may have seen, and you're got so much going on. So I appreciate you taking the time to share gems, giving people the free, as I said, free insight, education. People can really take this guidance, right, and kind of change their lives, bro. Like seek ways, and there's people actually actively seeking ways to kind of invest and what to do and that guidance, bro. So you've definitely helped. So I appreciate that, man. Appreciate you taking the time. That's dope of you. And one thing to close is, can you lend me a $5?
I can. Obviously,
even though you already told me you ain't got it before the time. You know,
I got a tenner, and we can.
He's got a tenner. Hey, listen, I take a tenner still because I don't.
We spoke though. Obviously, contracts are important. Because,
man literally wants it back. Do you know what's crazy? I think how many people now? I think 2 people have had a $5 on them, which is, when you consider the people that have been here, it's a staggering statistic, bro.
I'll check. I'll double check.
But you know what? Also,
there might be a $5.
Yeah, I feel like people don't have cash, right? People don't even walk around with cash anymore. So
I literally today I had to do a transfer for someone, and I needed like a card and card reader.
Okay.
I was like, I haven't seen my wallet in like a month, because like we're old enough now where we don't need ID for anything.
Yeah.
I use contactless on my phone for everything, so it's like, everything's online now. So like even when people are like, if I have to show ID, I'm like, I got a picture of my passport on my phone or something.
No, fair. No, I appreciate it, man. But anyway, man, thank you. As you said, hit him up on Property by Kazy if you've got any additional questions or you want to connect with him further, or if there's anything you want to clarify. Tell us how it went in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe. Thank you. Peace.
What you cooking?